Hello, everyone, and welcome to the launch of Youth Needs for Climate Finance report by YOUNGO Finance and Markets Working Group in collaboration with GYCAF. Today's session will be hosted by me, Sheen Tyagi, along with my co-authors Karishma, Ansaram, and Agathe, Jean-Alexis. Karishma Ansaram is a PhD candidate in climate finance at IESEG School of Management, France, with a particular focus on carbon markets around the world, and holds an MSc in carbon finance. She is the current contact point at Finance and Markets Working Group at YOUNGO. Agathe Jean-Alexis recently joined Rabobank as an analyst in project finance renewable energy. Prior to joining the bank, she worked for the integration of the EU electricity market with Magnus Energy. Agathe is also involved in YOUNGO for several years. She has been the contact point for the Finance and Markets Working Group in 2021-22. Sheen Tyagi is a 17-year-old youth activist from India. She is the founder and president of the Girl Up Nation Club, an international club at Girl Up campaign by the United Nations Foundation. She is also a youth fellow at Learning Planet by CRI Paris and UNESCO, and a young climate advocate at Young Climate Advocates Network by United Nations Foundation. She is the research project director at the Finance and Markets Working Group at YOUNGO. Karishma and Agathe, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for this introduction, Sheen. It's really a great pleasure to be here today to launch this report we've been working on together with Karishma and supported by YOUNGO Finance and Market Working Group for several months now. To start with, I would like to give maybe a bit of background information on this project. And first of all, on YOUNGO. For those of you who are not familiar with the organization, so YOUNGO is the official youth constituency to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, with a membership of over 1,000 youth organizations and NGOs, but also more than 10,000 individuals as a member. The aim of YOUNGO is to ensure that the perspectives of young and future generation are taken into account in the international climate decision-making processes. So under the aegis of YOUNGO, we have several working groups addressing different topics in relation to climate action. And one of them is the Finance and Markets Working Group. And I had the honor to be together with Karishma, the co-contact point for the year 2021-2022, when we revived the working group first, but also launched several initiatives, including this research project and need analysis. A bit more precisely, the Finance and Market Working Group is particularly focused on, as it says, a matter related to climate finance and carbon markets. And it aims to represent the youth voices on these topics, to advocate for youth inclusion in decision-making related to climate finance and carbon markets, and to advocate to scale up and improve access to climate finance for youth, which is also, hopefully, we hope to contribute to this goal with this research project and this first report. I think we can go to the next slide, Karishma, please. Yeah, so also as a part of the background to this project, first of all, it's important to highlight that this study is one of the very first mapping the accessibility and the availability of climate finance for young people. And this project started from quite a simple observation. It's that climate finance has received unprecedented attention on a global level in the past few years, and yet youth as a beneficiary of climate finance is pretty much absent from this momentum, or does not seem to benefit from it. So starting from this and based on this observation, YOUNGO Finance and Market Working Group started to engage in this research project to identify the needs of young people when it comes to climate finance and the limitation they find in accessing it. So the way we conducted this research in terms of methodology, we worked around some key questions, 4 of them, major questions that were to what extent are youth aware of climate finance first? The second one was how does youth access climate finance? The third one was, of course, how can we scale climate finance for youth? And finally, what are the challenges that young people face when it comes to accessing climate finance? To cover this question, we worked with 2 main tools, and the first one was a survey that was developed by working group members, YOUNGO Finance and Market Working Group members, and disseminated among YOUNGO and GYCAF networks. So GYCAF is the Global Youth Climate Action Funds that supported us in this project and for the survey dissemination in particular. And thanks to this survey, we were able to collect about 100 responses from board members of youth organizations. And finally, the second tool that we used to answer this question were qualitative interviews with participants that were selected based on their involvement in climate youth-led initiatives as board members, funders, or project leaders. So we provide you now with a fairly high-level overview of the emerging findings. Please take into account that we will have a roundtable and that there will be room for you to ask questions after the presentation of the report. The findings that we were able to draw are revolving around 3 main axes: awareness on climate finance, accessing and scaling up climate finance, and barrier to access. I will be introducing some of them, and then Karishma will also present some of the findings. So we will start with an important one, the definition of climate finance. So some elements of definition, when we talk about climate finance, we talk about the mobilization of financial resources to support climate mitigation and adaptation. And as you see, this is a fairly broad definition. It can encompass both public and private finance. And for some organization or in some definition, climate finance is primarily focused on supporting developing countries. That is, for example, the case in the definition of the Overseas Development Institute. However, there is not a globally accepted climate finance definition. And indeed, at the international level, that does not exist. And that comes with some consequences. Is that policymakers, investors, financial intermediaries, analysts do not always have the same understanding of the key climate finance terms and concepts, and that can make it very difficult to track what is climate finance, what financial flows account for climate finance. and especially if you take that then at a global international level. And what we find out during our research is that the understanding of climate finance by young people absolutely reflects this variability of the definition, and that the project participant explicitly raised the red flag of the ambiguity of the climate finance definition, that their definition of climate finance is primarily focused on the type of project being financed, meaning is the project receiving the funds benefiting to climate mitigation or adaptation, for example. And finally, some of the participants mention the responsibility and accountability of climate finance providers, and they link that to a public prerogative of the states to provide capital for this type of projects. So then we can continue with, after defining climate finance, or at least trying to understand how the participant and the young people would define climate finance, to try to understand what is their level of awareness on climate finance. Because of course, before accessing climate finance, you need to be aware what kind of sources exist, to be a bit familiar with what could be accessed. And there we have some interesting figures on the familiarity of young people with financial instruments. We cannot see the legend properly, but the pink, dark pink color represent very familiar, if I'm not mistaken, and the gray color not familiar. So you see that the instrument that young people are the most familiar with is grants, and the one that they are the least is bond. Interestingly, this is also reflected in the relation with a public capital provider and a private capital provider, and indeed private climate sources were completely or mostly left uncovered by the respondents. And most of the project participants could not identify specific streams of funds that are clearly dedicated to use. So they mostly mention public international sources of climate finance, traditional vehicles like the Green Environmental Fund and the Green Climate Fund were mentioned by the majority of participants. And interestingly as well, bilateral flow of climate finance, so finance between two countries, usually from developed countries, financing climate action in developing countries were also mentioned, and more precisely financial flow from the Netherlands and Commonwealth. And as I was mentioning regarding the relation between the awareness and the type of funding required for climate use-led initiative, grant is the most popular instrument. And youth organizations that are highly familiar with private climate finance instruments are in operation for more than 4 years. So we see that with a maturity of an organization come also awareness on different sources. However, that doesn't go hand in hand with better access to climate finance and diversified source of funding for this organization or initiative that are youth-led. So that is also something that would be interesting for us to follow up on. So these are the key findings when it comes to awareness of young people on climate finance. And I will now pass the floor to Karishma to present findings related to information sources on climate finance.
Thank you, Agathe. So hi, everyone. So I'll be guiding you through the rest of the findings, some of the recommendations and conclusion. So the next part that we assessed in this youth needs for climate finance is basically how the information is channeled amongst the youth. So what we could see is that there is existing studies that there are disparities of information about accessing climate finance already. And one of the limelight that was mentioned by several participants is that there is no centralized database, no platform where they can see that what are the specific finance available to youth or even like to different stakeholders. So what they were using instead of like what they were using or resorting to is mostly using WhatsApp groups. So amongst the most of the youth groups in different regions, we could see that they were using WhatsApp group and just sharing those opportunities by word of mouth. And this can lead to several disadvantages. So why? Because very often when we receive some messages on WhatsApp or some social groups, we tend to ignore them. And secondly, those information only reach them when the deadline is near. So we can know that they don't have time to apply for it. And so this opportunity is completely ignored. And secondly, we saw that amongst the African youth, they rely on websites such as Opportunity Guest or Fund for NGOs. So Opportunity Guest is a platform, it's a website, and it has a very active Facebook page as well, which provides opportunities for youth in different areas such as leadership, environment, and so on. But Fund for NGOs is also useful. But what happened is recently Fund for NGOs started a premium subscription. So what does it mean? You can only access information about those funds if you have a subscription. So as you know, youth are in need of climate finance. We need money to be able to make actions. And now to access those money, we need more money to be able to have information about those finance. So it's clearly there are barriers to be overcome in terms of information sources. And we also saw a snowballing method, especially amongst organizations that operate on regional level, let's say, for example, in EU, operating in EU level. So they would be most likely to use some small snowballing method, that is reach out to parties or potential collaborators that they know. So that's a bit it about the information sources that we could grasp. Now we move on to participation in climate finance decision-making or initiatives. So what we asked here is about what type of collaboration did the youth have in terms of climate finance, and also if they know they require more support. So first, the first diagram, as you can see, is about the collaboration or support received from the government. So 42% of the youth mentioned that they did receive some kind of support or collaboration. But when we see about the type of collaboration with other stakeholders, you can see that most of them said no, they did not collaborate with any stakeholder, or the stakeholders that were most common, the second most common, is about civil society. So civil society we see that it's very easy to collaborate, but what about private sector and even like banks and financial institutions? The collaboration is even lower. And the type of, and we also see the type of support received. So we are talking now about accessing the needs for climate finance. So we see that financial support is the least one received for youth. What they got most is education, empowerment, organizational or technical support. So this is about just a snapshot of the availability of type of support being provided to youth. And we can see that when we are talking about youth scaling climate finance for youth, this is not clearly happening the way it is. We are just having more non-financial support instead of financial support. Then we also saw that, just to back our arguments about non-financial versus financial, let's now explore this financial support received. So it's not surprising again that the financial support received is mostly in terms of grants. And secondly, most of these organizations also fund themselves through membership subscriptions or some savings, or even community support, which is voluntary. They don't have a secure finance stream. They also have challenges or competitions, which is very popular amongst them. So those grants received is not also very certain, I would say, because most of the grants that they received is through, there has been a competition, a challenge, and they won it, you know. So it's not like they know they can rely on certain stream of finance. And it can also be deduced that the local authorities or government or private sector are not actively providing climate finance for grassroots level youth-led actions. And there is also an over-reliance on international and external sources of funding, because most of those grants, the respondents mentioned that they came from international sources rather than from their own community. Moving on, we are going to talk about some barriers on accessing climate finance. So first, it's clearly a bureaucratic process. It's not standardized. So what the youth tell us, like sometimes just to have some funding, like $1,000, they have to fill in an application forms, which takes hours. And this happens like for every application. So bureaucratic process. And some, most of the time, they don't know who to reach out to. For example, there is European Union branch or UNDP providing a grant in the country, and they want more information and more support about application for the grants, so they do not know who to reach out to. And capacity building, capacity is also a challenge. So we saw that the youth do not have the capacity to come up with feasible project proposals. And that's one of the barriers where they are not able to access the finance. Language is also a barrier, since most of the application forms are in English. And this is a barrier that we faced while collecting the data as well, especially when we wanted to talk to Latin American participants. We could not reach out to many of the organization leaders because they do not speak English. So our team were French and speaking English speakers, and so we could not cover these. So it reflects the same situation in terms of language to access the grants. And then there is information and miscommunication, which has been highlighted in the information sources, where they do not know about where to find those opportunities about the funds. And secondly, there is no transparency as to who won the funding or who won the challenge, you know. So they made the grant applications. Most of the time, they do not even receive a reply that the application has been successful or not. So they just keep waiting. And this process keeps on ongoing. It's like a loop, you know. Politics and tokenism has also been highlighted, and this we can clearly be seen that youth might be seen as cherry picking. So we are involved into the decisions and events, but they did highlight that there is no concrete participation, or like the support that they receive is non-financial towards awareness and education and so on. So it does not really match the need of the youth to access climate finance. Then we also have a lack of diversity in accessing climate finance, because you clearly saw that what the youth had is grants, only grants. And to explore about this lack of diversity, our working group is also working on a second report whereby we analyze and we deep dive into the type of fundings that are available for the youth by assessing at least 100 funds that are targeted. So we are going to explore and see how the funding are allocated, and those findings so far do not diverge from what we saw in the needs. So it's still very skewed towards grant. Then we have a few recommendations about what should be done to scale climate finance for youth. So what we want is clearly sound governance and transparency, especially towards the fund allocation and tracking the use of proceeds, because as we mentioned, we do not know where those, we do not have transparency about who won the grant and how the fund is being used. And especially we need a centralized communication platform for the youth so that they can easily access it. And we need to increase inclusivity about how those information are being shared as well, especially in different regions of the world. Then we clearly need more capacity building for youth so that they can draft viable proposals to meet the criteria for funding, because it's very easy for fund providers to say, oh, this is not a viable project, so that's the only reason that we did not support this youth-led climate action. So more capacity building, more monitoring and evaluation, and more mentoring of those projects are needed. And we also are calling for more climate finance products to be targeted towards youth, because as I mentioned, right now, the type of funding is skewed towards grants and membership subscriptions. So the private sector should be incentivized to provide other type of financial instruments for youth-led climate action. I'll leave it to Agathe to take over and conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Karishma. Yeah, a few more recommendations that we were able to draw from this research project is that naturally, while local authorities should create an inclusive environment for youth to take part in climate finance initiatives, even though they do not provide a capital themselves, and that can take place, for example, through including youth in devising a national strategy, and to include youth in the budgeting process at both local and national level. I think it is the next slide, Karishma. Then it would be helpful to soften the technical requirements that are currently present in the application for funding for most funding channels, especially given the disparity in the criteria. The young people spend a lot of time drafting proposal, and many are discouraged actually to even apply for this funding when they see these technical requirements. And finally, to have a communication hierarchy needs to define basically to address the funding opportunity to the right people and the responsible individuals at the local level. That would be also very helpful in channeling more climate finance toward young people. And now reaching the conclusion, because I think we are a bit short on time. There are the key findings that we can draw from this project is that there is still an ambiguity towards the concept of climate finance from a youth perspective, that this restricted knowledge and the restricted communication on this subject, of course, restrict accessibility naturally, and that there is a need to make climate finance initiative more inclusive by defining key streams of funding for them. And that takes us happily to the next step, because this is just the first work, the first report, and it is a work in progress by a YOUNGO Finance and Market Working Group, who's currently working on a second report to map the availability of existing climate finance initiative, especially directed at young people. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for the lovely and the all-encompassing review of our report, Karishma and Agathe. Moving on, we will now be having a roundtable session to share perspectives and insights from organizations that mobilize youth funds, that is the Global Center for Adaptation and GYCAF. Through this roundtable session, we aim to share recommendations on scaling climate finance for youth and to hear from the youth about their engagements and experience. It is my pleasure to welcome Vijjasena Sugiono and Adriana Valenzuela. Vijjasena Sugiono is an energy enthusiast from Indonesia with a demonstrated history of working on energy issues at higher education entities. Sena is currently a first-year student at Yale University and takes on the role of the Yale Energy Liaison, who helps manage the $100,000 Student Green Innovation Fund. He's also a finance team officer at SDSN Youth, where he worked on redesigning the budget system and streamlining funding request flows. Adriana Valenzuela is thematic lead for youth leadership and education at the Global Center for Adaptation. She has over 25 years of experience dealing with youth movements at the local, national, and international level, of which 21 years of professional experience with NGOs, national and local governments, and the UN system, where Adriana mainly focuses on issues related to youth empowerment and sustainability. You all have the floor for the session.
Yeah, Sheen, maybe, thank you everyone. And Sheen, maybe before we move to the roundtable, because Adriana has to leave, maybe we'll ask Adriana to take the floor and then share your views about youth accessing climate finance and the role of GCA for that.
Adriana, your video is not visible, at least to me. Can you view her video, Karishma? Can you try switching off your video and starting it again?
But I cannot hear Adriana as well. Can you?
No, she's muted.
Okay, maybe we can take the questions then.
Sure.
Or we ask Sena to provide his views. Yeah.
Yes. So Sena, would you like to share your views first with the audience?
Right. So first off, thank you for inviting me to the event. Pleasure to represent GYCAF at the event. So giving some background about GYCAF, we're the Global Youth Climate Action Fund. So we are the first climate fund that is fully dedicated to providing youth funding for youth-led projects and youth-led climate action around the world. Our focus is to meet SDG goal number 13, which is climate action. And we are working with various partners to make sure that we can deliver on that goal. So my role in GYCAF programs coordinator, and I was working on developing the microgrant program for young people. So the microgrant program is a one of its kind program in the sense that it targets small scale funding. A problem that has been identified by a lot of young people and has been mentioned in the paper is that a lot of funding, the scale of funding there seems to be a mismatch in terms of the scale of funding. A lot of funding opportunities start at $10,000 and scale upwards to $10 million. That clearly does not match the level needed by young people, simply because, well, I've personally never been to a beach cleanup where we need $1 million, but clearly that mismatch is not represented accurately in the actual like financial market sphere. And a lot of funding seems to be targeted at larger scale projects, which kind of takes away from young people, because the more detailed, the larger the budget that is needed for a project, the more complicated the process becomes. And as identified by the report, there seems to be a lot of bureaucracy involved in large scale funding, which makes sense. If you're giving $1 million, you probably would want people to know what they're doing with the $1 million. But that's not what young people need. Young people need something that's smaller, that can let them start, build experience, gain some project management skills, so that they can move on and get bigger projects. And so it's this narrow window that we are targeting with our program to help young people create small scale local projects while giving them the necessary funds between $500 to $1,000. So that's an overview of our program. We also agree with a lot of the findings. Obviously, GYCAF helped with the data collection, with the response collection. And so we agree with a lot of the findings. We fully agree that a problem seems to be the lack of communication. A lot of young people do not know where to find funds. There is a lot of need out there. So to give some context, our microgrant program application, we had, I believe, around $10,000 to distribute, but we received over 1,300 applications on a 14-day period. That's close to 100 applications a day. And clearly, we did not have the capacity to review that many applications, and that made our team the bottleneck for fund disbursement. Then there were language barriers. There were a few of the applications were written in various languages, and we simply did not have capacity because our team was pretty much English dominated. And so we also had issues with language and communicating the information with a wide variety of people. And that kind of, in my opinion, reinforces the point that the problem is that there's just not enough capacity out there to support young people. There should be more action taken by other stakeholders to help support programs and developing funding opportunities or channels to help young people get access to such funding, because such access simply does not exist. And so I think that's a good place to start. I'm not sure where else I will continue, but if there are questions, maybe I can then give responses that are more tailored. Would that work for the Sheen?
Yes. Sarah, the Carolina is asking, could you kindly write down the name of the program again? Thanks. Just
Sure.
send it in the chat, or maybe you can even tell to the audience again the name of the program.
It's the Global Youth Climate Action Fund Micro Grant. We have closed our first round of applications because there were too many applications. So we had to cut the deadline short. We will open a second round sometime in the near future. So I can drop our website link. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Sure.
I can just drop the website link, and then maybe people could explore from the GYCAF website. So the name of the fund is we have a few funds. The first one that's open is the micro grants funding. Soon we will have the regular funding, which will involve larger amounts being distributed.
Okay. The first question that we got that I would like Karishma to answer is, what are the next steps for this research? And is YOUNGO looking to partner with any organizations or institutions to carry this initiative forward? So briefly, I did answer that we are planning on launching 3 reports for the topic. The second report is underway. But for the partnerships, Karishma, can you please answer that part?
Yes, so we are in discussion with RCC Kampala, which is the UNFCCC regional body, such that they can collaborate with us on this research, and specifically by hiring a research intern. And we are going to see how we can expand those research. And now that we have a first report, we can definitely leverage on reaching out to different institutions. I know Agathe, we did have a call with the Climate Finance Center with Imperial College. And we will now leverage on the launching of this first report to see how we are going to collaborate with centers dedicated to climate finance and to scale up this research further. Because as on a voluntary basis, we are working on this report, but we need much more capacity for data collection, especially because it's time consuming, and we want to have more capacity and support from the centers and more guidance as well from mentors from different organizations. So yes, we are going to follow up on the existing discussions and potentially looking for new collaborations.
Thank you for answering the question, Karishma. A question that we got from Abhinav is, what was the research design that was followed here in this research?
Oh yes, so I guess Agathe briefed about it. We used the survey and interviews in the presentation. Yeah, in the report. I don't know if you asked the question pre the slides or methodology or post.
Yes.
Yes.
If you would like to know more about the methodology, you can just check the research, the report that we have launched. The link I'll share again in the chat. In the meanwhile, I see a question from Michelle Lee. She's asking, is there a platform to help obtain open patents for climate change innovation to allow global licensing to accelerate innovation and scaling to be used globally as quickly as possible? So who would like to answer this question? Yeah,
I think it's a very broad question that is not only related to climate finance, if I understand correctly. And it would be great. I mean, that goes together with one of the recommendations to centralize more information. So when it comes to climate finance that are accessible for young people, but also innovation in general. As far as I am informed, there is currently no such platform existing, but maybe Senna and Karishma, you can add on that.
I don't know any either.
So one thing that we have been working at GYCAF and in collaboration with, I believe we were starting it with like Student Energy and SDG 7 Youth Constituency, is we are trying to build a funding platform that kind of aggregates all the information, translates it into different languages for different regions. And we're going to try and pilot the program in North America and then expand it to, I guess, the rest of the world. Obviously, the project is still in very early planning stages. We're still trying to approach different partners to work on this. We will probably end up working with YOUNGO a lot on developing such a platform. But currently, it's to the best of our knowledge, that is still a market gap, right? Especially in terms of like the information of aggregation of information. So I'm not sure about more of like the innovation end, but I probably am leaning more talking about the funding and in terms of both grants, equity, bonds, as well as funding for research related expenses supported from different universities, which falls under its own bucket, apparently. So I hope that kind of helps answer the question.
Yes, there's definitely no such platform which is there, but I feel many organizations like GYCAF are working on it. So hopefully we'll be able to share them with you once they're there. Okay, the last question that we have for you is, what are some of the levels to scale up youth access to climate finance? This is asked by Natalie.
I think she asked it before we present the recommendations on what has to be done.
Yes.
Yeah, Natalie, if you're good, we are not going to duplicate the answers, at least for me.
Yes, hopefully, because we've answered it in the recommendations. So if you have any specific questions, please feel free to message us, send us an email, and we'll be happy to answer them. But hopefully when you read the report, everything is super clear. We've tried our best to be concise. yet provide all the information required. I have a message from Ubaid. I wanted to ask the demographic characteristics of the respondents who participated in the study. The characteristics, the demographics. Karishma?
Yes, so the respondent is very skewed to African respondents. Why? Because this is like some, let's say, some type of bias, but in a good way, that we could capture most response from developing countries. So most of the respondents, as we did not expand on the methodology, is like we use snowballing as well. So we reached out to participants, and especially those participants that came for our Youth4Climate Summit. So since when we reached out, the developing countries participants were most likely to come back to us, because first they feel the need and they knew us, you know. So since they knew the interviewer, they knew that the person collecting the data, they were most likely to reach out and respond positively to us. So I would say it's very skewed towards first developing countries and Africa especially. Second, we try to assess, collect data from NGOs and startups, but we got mostly respondents for NGOs rather than startups, you know. So that's a second point in terms of demography. Then we have the participant statistics in the report clearly defined, especially in terms of experience or years of existence of the organizations and so on. So I would tell you happy reading from here, and I know that we've been quite quick in the presentations, but we have a more detailed report hopefully, and you are more than welcome to reach out to us by email as well. And we have put up a link if you want to join the initiative about YOUNGO Finance and Market Working Group. And I guess we have one small favor to ask you, because you're here, you're 48 participants. Let's leverage on your presence. So we are planning a climate finance academy that is by you, for you. And for that, we are gathering your view on what do you want to have in this academy. So we would be grateful if after this event, you could take up like a few minutes to just share more about it. Okay.
Yes, we would love
in the chat. Yes.
Yes, we would love to hear your views on the Climate Finance Academy. And if you join the working group, we will be sharing the updates with you all about what's going on with the academy. And yeah, thank you for the wonderful conversations, folks. This is the end of our session. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the wonderful Innovate4Climate team for giving us this platform to launch our first of the 3 reports on youth climate financing. I would like to thank my amazing co-authors, Karishma and Agathe, for their collaborative and helpful nature and for guiding me whenever required. Lastly, I would like to thank the attendees for being a part of this launch and making it all the more special. Thank you everyone for joining. If you have any questions, please do feel free to message us. The email for contacting us is present in the report. And yeah, I hope that's all right. Karishma, anything that you would like to add? Agathe? Sana?
No, thank you, Sheen, for the great facilitation, and thank you all for joining us today as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.